citizenship question will remain on the 2020 census form.
The people who are challenging it are challenging whether some of the statements he made during his campaign unfairly politicized this. Given the fact that we've had these questions on past censuses, there doesn't seem to be any real question whether it's constitutional to ask people simply whether they're a citizen or not a citizen. It is all based on the president said during the campaign, and that became irrelevant when he became president.
I'm Chad Groening.
An education analyst is calling on Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to do away with an Obama-era regulation that controls school discipline. Bob Kellogg has more.
President Obama's administration issued a Dear Colleague letter on school safety and student discipline in 2014, taking most control away from local schools. Policy analyst Jonathan Butcher of the Heritage Foundation hopes Secretary DeVos will completely rescind the regulation.
That is not Washington's place. It is not something that Washington should be involved in. It's well beyond the scope of the Department of Education.
He says the regulation not only did not prevent the massacre at the Parkland, Florida high school last February, but may actually have contributed to it.
Their school discipline policies mirror what is in this federal Dear Colleague letter. And we know now that the alleged shooter was actually referred to the district's intervention program dealing with student discipline, and it failed to prevent the tragedy.
Butcher says a compromise suggested by the Fordham Institute of removing just one portion of the regulation means federal bureaucrats would still be in control. I'm Bob Kellogg.
And the government says U.S. employers added 157,000 jobs in July, a solid gain, but below the pace of the first half of this year. The Labor Department says the unemployment rate ticked down to 3.9%, near the 18-year low of 3.8% reached in May. Average hourly pay gains remained modest, increasing 2.7% from a year earlier, the same as the two previous months. American Family News is available online at onenewsnow.com, on Facebook and Twitter, and download the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
My name's Keithan. My friend was shot dead on a Metro Transit bus, and if I wasn't here at Teen Challenge, that could have been me. But thanks to them, I'm off the streets and I'm drug-free.
If you know an adult or teenager who's struggling with a chemical addiction, Teen Challenge can help. Call us today at 417-581-2181 or reach us online at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
What this morning is the talk inside the White House after that moment in the White House press briefing yesterday, a contentious moment between Sarah Sanders and Jim Acosta of CNN. He pressed her to say that the press is not the enemy of the people. He ended up walking out of the briefing.
Fake news is dangerous, and we know for a fact that many of these so-called news reporters, that go out there have a complete disdain for President Trump. It's no wonder that we've seen that 90% of the media coverage for President Trump has been negative. What American people want to see is fair, objective coverage. And quite frankly, you've had reporters who cried the day that President Trump won, and they obviously show their bias. And so I think that's incredibly troubling. And for that being said, the president has to defend himself. The president and those of us in the administration who have been blamed and have been called names by journalists. And, we really want to be able to talk about the president's winning message. And it's very hard when you have reporters who prefer to see themselves on camera all the time, and many of the liberal media who have complete disdain for this president and refuse to acknowledge any of the positive work that he's doing.
Well, I don't think you should be defensive about this. You need to go on offense. And I know that's a big part of why you came on today. And we're going to take this up with our media panel in a moment, because it was quite a thing yesterday just watching that and seeing Sarah Sanders' reaction. I mean, she really felt it.
Wow, he's got that right. Sarah Sanders was accosted by Jim Acosta, and she handled it well, but the emotions are peaking, they're running high, and the reason that's happening is because we have deplorable behavior coming out of our media, and their justifications and allowances of the personal attacks against Sarah Sanders and other women in the White House and really women in government, period, are double standards that no one's buying anymore. And so the idea that Jim Acosta gets to be outraged about what he considers to be an insult from the President of the United States, it's just not hunting with the rest of us. That dog won't hunt. Welcome to the program. Stacey Washington, host of Stacey on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. We are having a pretty full show again today. Yesterday was fantastic with Eric Trump joining the program, and we had a really good discussion with him about trade and the presidency and his father's work on behalf of the country. We also spoke with Heather Long, economics correspondent for the Washington Post. She was amazing. First-time guest. We hope to have her back in the future to discuss economics with us again. And then, of course, good friend of mine, Kathleen McKinley, conservative commentator out of Texas, talking about the double standards with Twitter and how they seem to have just a zero tolerance policy for conservatives and a tolerate everything policy for everyone else. So that brings us to today. We have Travis Smith, Associate Professor of Political Science at Concordia University. He's the author of a book called Superhero Ethics, and he's going to join the program in hour one. And then in hour two, we will have Drew Johnson, Senior Fellow at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, an organization that I love their work. I love their work because they're all about protecting taxpayers. And I'm a taxpayer, and I think it's fantastic that an organization such as that would do the kind of work that they do to advocate on behalf of people who are working hard and deserve to keep more of their money. So Drew will be joining us in hour two to discuss energy industry paying it forward in Missouri, which is important because that's a connection of your tax dollars, energy, and what's happening locally at the state here in Missouri. And that will be applicable for a lot of our listening audience because sometimes Missouri is in the lead. Sometimes in the Midwest, we're the last ones to jump on a bandwagon, and other times we're innovators and we're out front. So we'll talk to Drew about that. Right now, I want to get into just a bit of, it's kind of good news, bad news. Good news is I'm telling you about it so we can do something about it. Bad news is it's a continuation of a story that we've been covering here on the show and that I've been encouraging people to make a change. And that's the thing about birth rates. When people decide to have fewer children, the ramifications of that continue to reverberate for decades. And so turning a birth rate around doesn't start the year you hope to turn it around. It starts years before that. We have to start this conversation now in our homes, at our kitchen tables. We have to reprioritize children. We have to reprioritize family. It's the bedrock. It's the cornerstone of what God has us here to do. And people make fun of the Bible verse that says, be fruitful and multiply, you know, and usually it's used as a derogatory indictment on someone who's not parented someone well and that child is out doing something awful. And they're like, oh, he looks like they were a little too fruitful, or people who can't seem to manage their families well. But the bulk of American families are not poorly managed. It's just not true. Now, we tend to do this with news. It's confirmation bias, and it's a little bit of, you know, the shiniest object wins. We see stories about people struggling with their family or their kids or people committing crimes, and we forget proportionally what that really is in a nation of 320 million people or so. You know, we're going to have people who commit crimes and do things wrong. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't have children. And we're going to see people who are stricken with poverty. You don't have to be wealthy to have a family. And the reason I'm making those very basic statements is because our culture currently kind of just flows over us and washes us in a sense of despair about being able to attain the American dream, which is largely painted around economic success, which, hey, rabid capitalist over here, I'm all about being successful. But I think we buy into this idea that if you're not having these $500 birthday parties for your child from the time they're, 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, up until the time they graduate from high school, and putting them in an expensive private school and living in a 3,000 square foot house on an acre in an exclusive subdivision with a gate at the front. And if you're not driving 2 Lexuses with a boat parked somewhere in, on a dock somewhere, and you don't have a second house, that you're not winning at life and that your family can't possibly be happy. There's nothing further from the truth. It's not about the material possessions that you have. It's about the joy you have in your life and your ability to be able to enjoy what you have and plan for and hopefully attain more based on what you're willing to work and do. And there is something to be said. And we've covered it here on the program, but perhaps next week we should do a whole couple of segments on the surveys and statistical studies that have been done that show that people aren't a ton happier once you make about $75,000 a year, and we'd have to adjust that up a couple, some percentage to include cost of living. But once you're earning about $75,000 a year, you're not substantially happier when you're earning $90,000. The next jump in material happiness that people report in these surveys is at about 125, and then after that, people who make $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 a year are not substantially more happy than people who make that 125. So it's not the earnings, it's what you do with the money. It's not how much you earn, it's how much you keep, and of what you keep, what you do with it, how the money passes through your household and what you do. And so what am I leading up to with all that? Well, it's disturbing. The CDC is reporting that the fertility rate in America is down yet again. Americans are having fewer kids now than in the past 42 years, which, you know how I love to connect everything up together. We wouldn't need to import so many people from other countries if Americans were having kids. So the U.S. fertility rate hit a 42-year low in the first quarter of 2018, and this is new data released Wednesday by the Centers for Disease Control. New numbers, which they actually maintain these numbers and add to them from the National Vital Statistics System, NVSS, reveal that the total fertility rate, TFR, has fallen steadily since the first quarter of 2016. Now, the total fertility rate measures the number of children likely to be born per woman of childbearing age over her life's course. The rate for the year ending in quarter 1, 2018 was 1.75 per woman, down from the end of 2017 rate of 1.76. Demographic Intelligence, a firm which forecasts demographic trends, projected that TFR will continue to fall through 2018, hitting 1.74 by the end of the year. They have this nifty little chart. It's pretty cool. And you guys know there's almost nothing more exciting besides interior design and other people's babies than a really nicely done chart. And this one is obviously CDC NVSS. It has the replacement rate, which is 2.1, and we are well below that. So the replacement rate, to give you a definition on that, is the number of children each woman needs to have in order to replace herself and her husband in the population. It's usually pegged at 2.1, which accounts for women who die before bearing children at all. As CDC data show, the United States has been below replacement fertility for decades, meaning the size of each subsequent generation has grown smaller. A sustained below replacement TFR eventually means that a population will stop growing altogether, as has happened in countries such as Japan, Lithuania, and Latvia. Now, y'all know I have great respect for the Japanese and their culture, but they just don't have enough babies. And we need Japanese people on the face of this planet. We need them. We need their expertise. We need their culture. We need them to be here. They need to have more kids. But it's not as simple as saying, yeah, just go ahead and have some more kids. The reasons that different societies tend to have fewer children are very complex, but we don't have any of those factors here in the United States. We're wealthy. We also have plenty of space for people to actually move into homes, available space to build new homes. We have enough housing. We have enough social services. We have enough of everything that's required for people to feel comfortable having a child. But we're not having that happen. People are getting married later. Millennials especially are getting married later. The longer you delay marriage, the more difficult it is to get pregnant. The 20s are the prime childbearing years for women. Men can make babies until they're, 80, 90 years old, but women need to start producing their family in the 20s. When you wait until the 30s, you've cut that window in half, and you can have a child at 38, you can have a child at 40 or 45, but the likelihood of you doing so is greatly diminished. And so in this report, it actually discusses the number of factors that explain the fertility decline. So let's see if they agree with me. American women are opting to delay having children to older and older ages. Ding! This trend doubtless has a variety of underlying causes: women's entry into the workforce, declining rates of marriage, the prevalence of effective birth control, substantial changes in how our culture views childbearing's role in a complete life. Younger and less educated women are hesitant to have children, said Sam Sturgeon, president of Demographic Intelligence. They are more determined than an early generation of women to have all of their ducks in a row in terms of their education, income, and even relationships before having kids. So they're taking longer to have the kids, and they're having fewer of them. Decomposing the TFR trends by age group actually confirms the trend. The number of women having children in their 30s has risen steadily since the mid-70s. 2016 was the first year in which more children were born to women aged 30 to 34 than women aged 25 to 29. 25 to 29 had previously been the most common age group for childbirth for decades, which is as it should be. Notably, the number of teenage girls aged 15 to 19 has also fallen steadily for birth rate. The rate for girls aged 10 to 14 has been persistently below 1 child per 1,000 women since 1999, and that's actually really good. We don't want 10 to 14-year-old girls having children. So that's good news buried in this report. Now, later childbearing almost certainly has some good consequences. It's tied to the historic low abortion rates that the United States currently enjoys. At the same time, socioeconomic trends driving later and less motherhood raise a number of concerns for policymakers and the public. Slowing population growth can mean lessening human capital, which can in turn drive economic stagnation. So while people are talking about how they want the United States to be, to continue our hegemony on into subsequent generations, into the future, that we want to be leaders on the international stage, that we want to continue to have dominance, if you look at the size of the United States compared to some of the other more populous countries, the amount of power and wealth that we have in this country is astronomical. It's outsized. It's abnormal. It's fantastic, but it can't persist if we don't create more people. As we bring in more people who aren't Americans, some of whom aren't interested in assimilating into American culture, and continue to produce fewer Americans ourselves, what do you think that looks like? It doesn't look good. And I don't mean it doesn't look good like, in the Kim Kardashian world of everything being perfect, and if it's not, just inject some plastic into it. I'm talking about not looking good for our economic well-being and for the well-being of our nation. God calls us to be fruitful and multiply. He doesn't say wait until you're economically stable to do so. He just says get married. We can do this. When we get back, we're going to have audio from Molly Hemingway talking about how the president didn't create the media distrust that currently exists. Stay right there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. I'm reading through the Old Testament now, and I'm coming to places that are named that I see on our Israel tour every March. It's really fascinating to think that Jericho existed way back in the Old Testament thousands of years ago, and I can visit there today. The same can be said for Jerusalem. The Bible literally comes to life when you visit Israel, the Holy Land. Now, we're going in March. My wife Allison and I, we lead these tours every March. So if you would like to go with us, you need to go to the website and check it out. It's twholyland.com, twholyland.com. If you want a brochure sent to your mailbox, just call us at 800-FAMILIES, option 5. That's 800-FAMILIES, option 5, and we'll send you a brochure.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a Legacy Moment. Many years ago, I heard an old preacher say, what we need are Christians who can pray through. I must admit, when I first heard that, I thought, what in the world does he mean by that? It took me years to figure it out, but I think he wasn't talking about emotional prayers. He was referring to prayers that are backed up by a godly, obedient life. The prayers of obedient followers touch the very heart of God. He wants what we say to be an extension of how we live. Listen to these words in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 27. Then the Levitical priests arose and blessed the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer came to his holy dwelling place, to heaven. Now you have to understand the context here. This comes on the heels of their obeying God. They repented of their sin. They were worshiping God. They had reinstituted the Passover. This was an act of obedience. And so the bookend is that when they prayed on behalf of the people, their prayers ascended to heaven, to the very place of God, and God heard them. God listened to them. This begs several important questions. Number one, are your prayers being answered? I know the answers are yes, no, or wait, but are they being answered? Number two, is there sin in your life? Are you praying with a clean heart? Then number three, are you doing what God has called you to do? Are you following through? Are you being obedient? Here's what I want you to remember today. Prayer is our lifeline to God. Let's make sure the line is clear. We want to be known as those who can pray through.
You've been listening to Legacy Moment with Crawford Loritz, pastor of Fellowship Bible Church in Roswell, Georgia, and heard on the weekly program Living a Legacy. For more information, go to livingalegacy.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Yeah, Donald Trump did not create distrust of the media. Distrust of the media helped create Donald Trump. And the media really need to get a handle on why so many Americans don't just dislike them, but loathe them. If the only way you can sort of defend media performances, or if you get really upset about Donald Trump criticizing the media, is if you think that the media are doing a good job. And the fact is, very few Americans actually think the media are doing a good job. A recent poll showed that 72% of Americans think that the media deliberately report fake, false, or misleading news. And I think the misleading thing is really significant there. It's not that people are just making up facts out of whole cloth, but the bias and the self-aggrandizement and the idiocy that people see in the media is frustrating them, and the media really need to take a hard look inside. Jim Acosta telling a woman that she needs to say certain words or else he's not going to stop yelling at her is not going to improve the relationship between the media and the American people.
That was Molly Hemingway, and she's right. First of all, just imagine, just for a second, let's get hypothetical here, even though I hate hypotheticals. Let's paint a picture of a liberal woman who is in a position of authority being told by some conservative man that she needs to rebuke her boss. She needs to disagree with what her boss said. She needs to say what he's telling her to say to agree with him, or he's not going to stop. I'm not going to let up on you until you say what I want you to say. Can you even picture it? Well, can you picture that guy keeping his job? That's the question. Can you picture that guy remaining employed with whoever? No. Because opinions are not to be had by people who don't hold the right political ideology. And by right, I mean approved liberal orthodoxy, not just right as in Stacy on the right or, wow, that sounds correct. And that's what we're seeing here. And the further and further we go, we just keep on going and going and going, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And in response to it, instead of having some introspection, instead of the media saying, you know what, we don't like this guy, but we got to cover him fairly because this is our legacy too. Historians will look back on this time and they'll say, this X, Y, and Z about this president. But what they're going to say about us as media people is that they see a lot of unprofessionalism, and that doesn't make us look good. That's not going to be what I want taught about my time as a journalist in the public eye. But they haven't even thought about that. Not only have they not thought about it, they don't care. Now, part of it is because they're paid to behave this way, and part of it is because, like it or not, it's how they feel. They're governed by their feelings, and that makes them behave in this way. So you've got Kellyanne Conway. She was on one of the shows this morning talking about journalists with 7-figure contracts. Let's listen to number 4.
People know what they see, and what they see are their bonuses, their raises, the deregulation, the historic tax cuts. They have confidence in this economy, and they're spending more of their money. I was at that rally tonight with the president. I participated in the roundtable with him ahead of time also. People are absolutely buoyant. They know that beginning with Hillary Clinton, they were referred to as irredeemable and deplorable and looked down upon. They know that Barack Obama, when he was running for president, said these people who cling to their God and their guns and their, he's had other things to say, just always dismissing them. And this is why it's a very important point. I'm not sure they care anymore. I speak to these people all the time. You know what they care about? They care that they have a president who respects and takes action daily for the military, for the veterans, and for them. And look, let's not mistake what's going on here too. A lot of these journalists have very expensive 7-figure contracts, go on late night TV where they can yuck it up with somebody similarly situated who could just laugh all day long, particularly about the women in the Trump administration. Then they go and give speeches. I mean, they speak for free every single day, and half the country doesn't, or most of the country doesn't listen to them.
So she's right. She's talking about the frequency with which these same individuals like Jim Acosta appear on CNN. And I believe we discussed here on the program that there's a kind of a dominance that the news organizations achieve in the White House briefing room. And how they do it is, so you have, let's say you have Jim Acosta. He's a White House correspondent. He's also a contributor on CNN. He works for CNN, and so he provides television coverage from his time at the White House. So he has to make news in the briefing room. He can't just be in there and come out and report nothing. He has to report something. And CNN's not going to permit him to report good news coming out of there, so he has to kind of create negative news. Now, if he's not permitted to speak, it's okay because CNN has like maybe a third of the chairs in the room. Because if you're there in the White House briefing room and you work for a tiny little news organization or something small, something that's not as well known, and you make news by asking a derogatory question or getting something in or breaking some news, as soon as you do that, you get an offer for a contract from CNN. Now they've got you under contract as a contributor to their network. They're paying you whatever per year. And so not only are you going to come on and comment about news of the day, they also have you basically, it's another chair for CNN in the briefing room. So they have it fixed between CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, all of the news organizations that already have space in the room. They purchase more space in the room by hiring individuals, because who's going to turn down a contributor contract if you're not a conservative and you know you're not going on to get roasted every night? Then you're going to say yes because it's great expansion for your brand. It's fantastic money that you get paid. If you're already going on television, now you're going on TV on CNN and you're being paid to do so. And you have the prestige of saying, not only am I writing for this organization like the Washington Post, Washington Times, whatever, but now I'm also a CNN contributor. I mean, the weightiness of that and the prestige of being a CNN contributor, you know, it varies depending on who you're talking to, because most conservatives no longer consider it to be a viable news organization or someplace that you would want to be a contributor to. But it's definitely a feather in your cap. So what my hope is for all of this is if you know how it works, right? If you see the synergy at work, that almost everyone in that briefing room, their demeanor towards Sarah Huckabee Sanders is of open, unbridled hate. They loathe her. They tolerate her. She has to go into a space and think of the dynamic that we're talking about here, because it's one thing to sit and, you know, we're having this conversation now, you and me, about this subject, but it's a totally another thing to be in that space. If you've ever had to walk into a room where a lot of people are gathered and you already know going in that they don't like you, that they don't want you there, that they're out to get something out of you in that space that they can use to mock you, vilify you, tear you down, call for your firing or resignation. And every day you have to go into that space. And it's true, she's in there for at max 2 or 3 hours a day. Most days it's an hour, hour and a half. She has to prepare for it, though, and then she has to do television afterwards as well, because she's the spokesperson for the president. She's the press secretary. But just imagine going into a space where you know most of the people in the room openly hate you. They've spent time at a national event that was televised, mocking your appearance and laughing at someone else making fun of you. You see them every day, and no matter what you do, whether it's joking about apple pie, whether it's talking about, you know, the weather, the season, anything you try to do to lessen the tension in the room, They rebuff you because they like the tension. They're marinated in it. It's their natural place of being. They love it there. They want the tension to be there. They like to see you uncomfortable. They're waiting for you to break. And you have to go in that room every day. And you get in there, and then the head clown in charge, which is Jim Acosta, regularly lobs over the most ridiculous insults. His questions are always rude. He always interrupts. And when you don't call on him, he throws a petulant hissy fit. And when you do, he can't even ask one question. Just ask the question and then let you answer so you can then maybe take a follow-on from him. He has to make it so that you're interrupted and you're even more flustered because his intention is to get you to mess up, slip up, make a mistake. And most of his questions have zero to do with policy, laws that have been signed into action, foreign policy news. All he asks about it, well, the president said the enemy of the people. Well, the president insulted me. Well, I didn't get to ask 2 questions yesterday. It's just a constant barrage of personality conflict. It's like the real news journalists of the White House. Washington, D.C. And that is supposed to spur her on to making a passionate defense of the media? At what point do we acknowledge that this woman, why would she say anything nice about the media in that room when that's her everyday existence? Every other, 3-4 weeks, every other month, we see a bunch of news outlets calling for her to be fired. Basically, it's just whatever temperature it is. If it's the right temperature and it's the right Tuesday or Thursday, then a whole bunch of media outlets at the same time will come out and say, Sarah Huckabee Sanders needs to be fired. She lied about this. She lied about that. They never give her the benefit of the doubt. If she makes a mistake, they capitalize on it and it's a lie. It's premeditated. It's like she's killing puppies in the evening time instead of being with her family. And they've also announced that it's open season on her. She has Secret Service protection now because she can't leave and go out in public because Maxine Waters has said she needs to be run out of town. She should have no safe space anywhere in this country. Media journalists, none of them denounce that. And what I mean by denouncing it is a 750 to 800 word op-ed about the idiocy of a sitting congressperson calling for someone to be publicly shamed and ridiculed when they haven't been convicted of a crime, just basically calling for a witch hunt. Where was Jim Acosta then? If he wants Sarah Huckabee Sanders to say that he's not the enemy of the people, that the media are not the enemy of the people, and mind you, I've not said that. I have actually said that I think while it has been a fantastic campaign thing for the president, he's been able to utilize it to the best of his ability. He's been able to make news out of the detractors that he has in the media. He's been able to weaponize them against themselves. He's effectively shown the American people that we no longer have an objective fourth estate, that the fourth estate in this country is a media apparatus wholly owned subsidiary of the Democrats. So when you find a reporter that's fair and reasonable and they're out there, it's a surprise. You're pleasantly surprised by it. That is what comes out of the kind of coverage that they've provided to this president and to regular Americans. I think if you gathered a bunch of them together, you could probably get a mouthful of teeth. That's the most recent insult to people who were jeering at the media at a rally that was held by President Trump by, you guessed it, a blue check marked media person. So if this is where we are, if this is what's going on in the country, why should Sarah Huckabee Sanders defend the media to Jim Acosta? Because he wants her to? Because he's going to make her do it? Because he threw a hissy fit and he jumped up and walked out of the room? I almost feel like when we saw her jump up and walk out of the room, she won. She won that one. And the reason is because he's unpleasant and he's not a good addition to the briefing room. So why shouldn't he get up and walk out? I'm not even sure why they allow him to keep coming in. Not because I want to see the media shut down or I don't think CNN is real news. None of that stuff. I'm just saying the guy's rude all the time. He doesn't have any decorum. That's why I wonder why he's allowed to continue. So I had to cover that today. I had to talk about that today because a lot of people who are currently castigating the president for saying that the media is fake news, or, you know, they're the enemy of the people, yada, yada, yada. They haven't had anything to say about the attacks on Barron Trump, Melania Trump. They haven't had anything to say about the attacks on Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her family. They just haven't had anything to say. And so if you want Sarah Huckabee Sanders to defend the media, then you would have to be the ones out there providing the same kind of defense to her. And the reason that you need to do that is because that's the way humanity works. Humans don't usually go out of their way to defend humans who are attacking them. That doesn't even, like, for people who believe in evolution and survival of the fittest, it seems like they would understand that in order for Sarah Huckabee Sanders to want to defend Jim Acosta, she would have to see him as an ally, or at very least as someone who is objective and dedicated to reporting the truth, no matter where that truth might lie, no matter what direction that truth might take him in. Then she would have an impetus to defend him. We don't see that. And we're not going to see it. So we've also got a bunch of different news items for Friday. And today's Friday. It's our Friday News Roundup. Happy Friday to you. We have so much cool stuff planned for next week for launching the show on American Family Radio. We're super excited about that. And so I make sure and be tuned in. If you're tuned in on YouTube or Facebook or something like that, you're good to go. Nothing new to be done. We'll be welcoming in the new listeners from the stations on American Family Radio on Monday, and it'll be a fantastic time. But it all happens on Monday. We are so excited about it. So I want to get a little bit of a flashback. Do you guys remember back in 2008? It seems like a lifetime ago. Back in 2008, we had frenzied, angry mobs turning on reporters in a dangerous physical altercation. The reporters were from Fox News. Jim Acosta didn't have anything to say back then. None of the media who currently think CNN's Acosta is right had anything to say about these angry mobs attacking Fox News reporters. And we're wondering why we don't have people at the White House defending the media right now? I don't know why. All right, when we get back, we will have Travis Smith, Associate Professor of Political Science at Concordia University. Stay there.
Physical activity is the new trend. It's not a bad thing unless it has brought a sense of vanity in your life. 2 years ago, I was not happy with the number on the scale nor how I looked. I've never been a huge person, but I was, as the old folks would say, healthy. I joined a gym, gained a personal trainer, even changed some of my eating habits. The Lord checked me one day and in my spirit said, "Why are you disgusted with yourself? Be healthy, take care of the temple I've loaned you, but do it because you want to honor this body, which is your responsibility while on this earth." I said, "You better let me know, Abba." Psalms 139 verse 14 says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." 15 pounds down, I know that even if I was to never look like Serena Williams with those nice framed, worked out arms, I am wonderfully made in his image, and so are you. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Victory McIntosh. Connect with us more at urbanfamilytalk.com.
I'm not so certain we have as much time as many of us think. It's high time for the body of Christ to return with a fire lit up under us to proclaiming the truth of God's word, to proclaim the truth of sin and repentance, and not coming from a high, lofty position, but telling the truth as such were some of us. We have to do that. We have to. But what happens is, and I call this first world problem, we have this epidemic of churchianity in America, to where we are far more accepting and far more willing to embrace the trappings of church life, even if they're void of the presence and power and fire of Christ. And I would say to you, just as the Bible says, that we can have a form of godliness while simultaneously, at the exact same time, deny the very power of the gospel.
Tune in to the Hamilton Corner, weekday afternoons at 5 Central on Urban Family Talk.
I'm Chad Pergram with the Speaker's Lobby. What does breakdancing have to do with President Trump's threat to force a government shutdown if he doesn't get money for his border wall? Everything. It's always risky to talk about a government shutdown, especially right before the midterm elections. Florida Agriculture Commissioner Adam Putnam used to be the third highest ranking Republican in the House. And in September 2008, Putnam delivered perhaps the best remark about shutdown gambits for political advantage. In 2008, Republican House and Senate candidates were losing badly at the polls. Senator John McCain trailed Barack Obama. Putnam's views on a shutdown tactic before an election? Quote, that would be like trying to breakdance around nitroglycerin. Close quote. President Trump says he doesn't care about the political consequences of a shutdown, but Republicans in Congress certainly do. With the Speaker's Lobby, Chad Pergram, Fox News.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. Thanks for being with us today. Happy Friday to you. Lots of news and information coming at you right here live from the little SOTR studios in St. Louis via our networks at American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. We're super excited to be with you and to be able to have our next guest on the program. We have with us right now Travis Smith, Associate Professor of Political Science at Concordia University. He's also the author of a book called Superhero Ethics. Travis, thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you very much for having me on Urban Family Talk Radio today, Stacy.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. I'm super excited about your book, Superheroes Save American Freedom. Tell us about the book. Why'd you write it?
I'm sorry?
Tell us about the book. Why'd you write the book?
Okay, so Superhero Ethics is the title of my book. And in that book, I take a look at 10 different very popular superheroes, well known from the recent movies, and ask questions like, are they good role models? Are these the kind of people that we would admire? If you imagine what people in the real world who are similar to them, what we would be like if we tried to model ourselves after their behavior. Would we be happier people? Would we be better members of our communities? And part of that question is, are these kinds of heroes suitable for society based on the premises of equality and freedom?
Wow. So I have to say to you, one of the things that's an obsession for almost everyone that we know, like family anecdotal talk here, is these superhero movies, the Marvel Universe and everything that's going on with these. It's a succession of films, and they all come from the comic book hero series that, you know, I wasn't a huge comic book person beyond the Archie comics and Garfield and stuff like that and whatever was in the newspaper growing up. But I did have friends, especially the guys, who were much more interested in the superhero. Not just one or two, but like literally following the stories. Every time a new one would come out, they would get it, they'd read it, they'd add to it.
It's one of those addictive hobbies. Once you get hooked, there's tens of thousands more to read. In Superhero Ethics, though, I made a point of picking characters that were not so obscure. I didn't want to write a book that was only for hardcore comic book reading fans. But as long as you're the kind of person who's familiar with these characters, you enjoy going to them or taking your children or your grandchildren to them so you've got some familiarity, and you're interested in ethical questions about what kind of character should we have in order to live well. If you've got those interests, then I've written a book that's tried to keep you in mind.
So let's talk about the ethics. In your piece over at the Daily Caller, you talk about how we discourage or downplay everyday bravery, moderation, restraint, resilience, generosity, gratitude, decency, sociability, sacrifice, and the exercise of good judgment, all of the efforts that generate and constitute responsibility towards oneself and one's community. That's a mouthful. I totally agree with it, but let's talk about it.
Yeah, I packed a lot in there. Right. No, today it seems that people pat themselves on the back and regard themselves as righteous and good people so long as they hold the correct opinions and have the right feelings and sentiments and know when to express outrage and indignation as loudly as possible and retweet the correct hashtags. And as long as you do those things, then you can regard yourself as virtuous. And what I look at in the book are drawing upon classical traditions and biblical traditions, looking at, what kinds of qualities of character and qualities of mind we need to cultivate in ourselves and in our neighbors and in our children in order that we might actually try to be the best people we can be.
So is that what people really want? Because I've noticed a change from, let's just talk about one of the superhero franchises that's super popular is it's Captain America. And in the opening movie for Captain America, he is this, he's not, goody two-shoes is an insult. He is a truly upright, upstanding, amazing person who's trapped in a body that is weak and frail and really just, it can't do what he'd love to do. So he submits himself to experimentation. He's injected with something that instantly, as can only happen on TV, changes him into this Superman who's not only super physically, but still retains the original, morally outstanding inner core beliefs that made him such he was just like someone that you think to yourself, wow, that's an amazing person. As you're watching the movie, you're so sympathetic to him, and he just never gives up. And then he becomes, the outside of him embodies what was on the inside. That's the first movie. He goes on to save people. He rescues the whole country. He saves his friend. He saves a bunch of his friends, and they go out and they work, and he's always willing to literally lay his body down on the grenade so that others can survive. And over again, he proves his exemplary character. When given in the opportunity to shine, he takes every chance to make it happen. Then in the second movie, they kind of make fun of him for not liking to curse and things like that. And so they have to bring him down a little bit so he can be more real and relatable. So they have him curse a little bit, and they have him have a few flaws. And then in the third movie, which is not a Captain America movie, it's more like an Avengers smash-up type of a thing where everyone's in it, they bring him down a little bit more. And so what I see happening, and my kids even notice this, they want to make Captain America so much more relatable and real to us that they're kind of, every movie they chisel away at some of that morally upright, outstanding character that made him so palatable in the first movie, such an idol in the first movie. And I almost feel like by the next movie or two, he'll be doing stuff that all of us find repugnant, and he'll be still drunk Captain America, something like that. Why do they do that? Like, why?
You really sound like you know what you're talking about, Stacey.
Well, we watch them all. We are Marvel heads over here. We have the T-shirts, we have the movies, and we go to the movies and watch the movies. And when we see something in the movie that we feel like I was up getting a snack, something like that, we'll go watch it again at the movies. That's who we are.
And it sounds like you don't just watch the movies. You do what I do with my son, which is talk about them and analyze them and ask whether or not the characters are admirable and praiseworthy, or how they handle the situations. Are the kinds of things that we should try to emulate in our own lives.
Yeah, we do. Those are the best conversations, because you know what, Travis? What I find with our kids, because they're teenagers and you can never talk too much to a teenager. They will not talk to you as much as you want to, but you never get to a point with a teenager where you're like, oh, I'm so tired of talking to you. I find them so fascinating because their perspective is so different from mine. I mean, they're obviously they're our children and they're come out of our household and we share a lot of beliefs, but they really have a different way of analyzing and receiving information than I do. And so with our son, knowing all of the, I forget what he calls it, but it's the backstory to everything where you read the comic books and then it's either canon or it's not canon. I mean, he can really get into it. Yeah, sure, the lore. Yeah. So he'll say, well, the thing is, Mom, if you don't like that, you would have really hated that comic book because the comic book was worse than that, but they cleaned it up for the movie. But obviously they had to leave that in there because that's canon. And I'm like, oh, I hate that. I don't like that. You know, I don't like them making him do that. But in the end, are they going to end up tearing down all of these heroes they've built up for us to kind of look at and say, wow, that's great? Or will they leave them as heroes? Because I feel like we're on a trajectory.
That's really a fascinating question. They're only, I think, about halfway through all the movies they plan to do according to their current story arc over the course of 15-something years. And you're right. I mean, I remember when the first Avenger came out, the first Captain America movie, I thought to myself, wow, I can't remember a more pro-military, pro-American forces film since 9/11. That was just almost unapologetically, hurrah, 3 cheers for America, liberating, people around the world from evildoers. That was just so, it reminded me of watching Yankee Doodle Dandy or something like that. But you're right, they have been putting him through the ringer, and that's something that the character has done in the comic books as well, as I'm sure maybe when your son has told you, that every now and then when America isn't good enough for Captain America stops being Captain America until it becomes good enough for him again, because he believes he stands up for its ideals, and its ideals exceed any particular government at the time, and so he sort of reserves the right to believe that he knows what's better for America than the current government does. So that's not betraying the character's background in the comic books. It's representing it, and I imagine that as the story arc continues, I think we'll see him not just, as you say, hanging out in the down and outer bars. I think we'll see some kind of transformation in him. It is the case, as you might remember, though, the second Captain America movie, the first bit of dialogue is him running around the reflecting pool with his friend the Falcon, and everything he says is on your left, on your left, on your left, establishing the politics of Captain America in the Marvel movies.
Wait, is that what that was?
That they've been having go through some character changes as well, and so it'll be interesting to see where they take them. That's for sure.
Okay, so him running around that guy, that and him saying on your left, because Captain America's a leftist?
Captain America is sort of established in the comic books as usually being something like a center-left New Deal liberal who will, in a fashion that regards that as consistent with the Constitution and founding, and not a progressive transformation of it into something allegedly new and better and different for the future. Sort of a center-left with a libertarian streak. The Civil War story is originally more libertarian than anything else. But right, I mean, insofar as, I don't mean to say he's far left. He's partisan, and part of America is, of course, people get to be, pick their sides, and as long as they regard themselves as part of the overall community and see themselves as sharing more in common with the people they disagree with and not regarding their fellow citizens as enemies, that's perfectly fine for an American, right? The problem I think you see today are the number of people who see their fellow Americans, the people they disagree with, as if they're, betraying the ideals, or as if their fellow Americans are almost like supervillains to be thwarted in the streets. And that's not something Captain America would ever approve of. You have those kinds of radicals, Captain America would definitely give them at least a stern talking to.
You know what's a funny aside about all of this discussion is that most Americans are unaware, because you talked about Captain America being kind of a New Deal progressive. Most Americans are unaware of the makeup of our armed forces, and that we have an overrepresentation, statistically speaking, of minorities in America's armed forces. Blacks and Hispanics and women really outnumber statistically their counterparts in military service. And it's an amazing thing that America is so inspiring, in spite of all of the talk about our racism and our horrible culture and how everyone here is just a white supremacist and people are in cattle cars getting sent off to some unknown imaginary horror, and how awful it is to be a woman, and how, all the things that people say about America. Our country inspires minorities to join the service. We have an all-volunteer service, and to serve there. And so when I see the Captain America being this, it was unabashedly pro-military, and it just painted military people as being really heroic. And honestly, they are. I'm a veteran, and I remember meeting people in the service who were they were just stunningly upright people, and they were so selfless. And so they were human beings, and not everyone in the military was perfect. But I just remember that time that I served as being a time where I constantly bumped into excellent people, and they weren't being paid much, and they were wearing the uniform. And some of those people that I would bump into and meet and interact with ended up dying. They would go to Bosnia and get their legs blown off and not come home. I mean, there were things that happened where I was like, I can't believe that amazing person isn't with us anymore. I just met them. And this is the kind of military service that we have in this country, which is inspiring. And so a movie like Captain America, in my opinion, it shouldn't be a one-off. It should be something that we see routinely coming out of Hollywood, as well as more films that exemplify some of the things you're talking about here in your piece at the Daily Caller, where we have amazing people in this country. And that's not an indictment on other countries. It's just a statement of fact about this country. And in this country where we have these amazing people, we often only see one representation of them. And lately, the representation has been that they have to be on the left to, you know, maintain that awesomeness, that they're really not that awesome unless they're also politically on the left. And I think that's a real disservice for Hollywood, because there's an untold number of millions of Americans who want to go to movies and feel the way they felt, like we felt when we watched Captain America. We want that kind of movie experience again. And I hope they'll read your book and your piece here and take from it it's a untapped market. There's money on the table. They could do more movies like that. They'd still be interesting, and they'd be box office hits, and they would make a lot of money.
No, I think that's right. Not everything has to be gritty and grim and depressing and an apocalypse and a catastrophe, but rather the stories where we see characters that you can sort of regard as metaphorically resembling the kinds of qualities of characters that we would like to have at our best, and we can see in the people in our own society that we admire the most, is more inspirational. And, I mean, members of the armed forces stand for ideals higher than party politics, and they don't believe that politicians are superheroes, and that they don't regard the differences that they have between themselves as more important than the causes and the ideals to which they unite together in the defense of. And so I hope that's in line with what you're saying, Stacey.
Yeah, it is. And I want to give you a chance to give us your Twitter handle before we end this segment, because I hear the music. What's your Twitter handle and your website?
You'll have to forgive me. I don't use Twitter.
The horror!
Consistent with what you were saying earlier in the show and yesterday's program as well. It may be more trouble than it's worth, so I tend to avoid it.
Thank you for coming on. I'm tweeting your article out anyway. Thank you for writing it, and we hope to talk to you again soon, Travis. Travis Smith, Associate Professor of Political Science at Concordia University. I'm Stacey Washington. We'll be right back.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
Being there is half the battle. 1milliondads.com exists to help Christian fathers to be present and intentional in the lives of their children. Our hope is to wake up the fearsome wonder that is the mighty man of God and restore him to his role as leader, teacher, and counselor. Visit 1milliondads.com. 1milliondads.com.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh. The Labor Department says 157,000 jobs were added last month, while the unemployment rate ticked down to 3.9%. But Dan Celia of Financial Issues is not concerned.
The markets ought to look at this and see the revisions from the last 2 months. The revisions for the last 2 months were astronomical. As a matter of fact, last month alone was over 50,000 jobs.
Construction is one of the largest employers in the country, with 308,000 new jobs over the year. Even the retail industry had positive news to report, with hiring in clothing, general merchandise, and food and beverage stores. Authorities are still looking for a 12-year-old Chinese girl who went missing from her tour group at Reagan International Airport. Chief David Hulcher of the Metro Washington Airport Authority Police describes what they know happened to the young girl, Jingjing Ma.
Jingjing arrived at DCA after visiting New York with a tour group translated as Delta, or Delta Day May. As they were preparing to check in, the students were given their passports, and at some point she separated from the group, stating she needed to use the restroom. She then met with an Asian female, who we are still trying to identify, appears to have changed some clothing, and left the terminal through the arrivals level. Jingjing and the Asian female then enter a white Infiniti QX60 years between 2016 and 2018 with unknown New York tags.
A critic of Islam is convinced that the city of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Police Department have been involved in a massive cover-up regarding the shooting death of an Australian woman more than a year ago by a Somali police officer. Chad Groening has more.
Justine Damon was supposed to be married this month, but on July 15, 2017, she was shot by Minneapolis police officer Mohammed Noor through the driver's side window of the police car while he was sitting in the passenger side. Damon had called 911 about what she thought sounded like a rape. Noor had refused to explain why he shot Damon when she approached the squad car, and in March of 2018 was finally charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. The victim's family has sued for answers. Robert Spencer is the director of Jihad Watch. He says there are too many unanswered questions.
The real story in this seems to be that this cop was hired because he was a Muslim and because the Minneapolis Police Department and the city of Minneapolis wanted to show how wonderful multicultural they were. And so they hired this guy even though he was not competent and kept him on the force even though there were complaints about his behavior as a police officer.
And Spencer says after the shooting, they tried to cover it up.
They don't want the failure of their multiculturalist policy to be obvious to the world. And so we can only hope that this lawsuit from the family will indeed bring all that out and make it clear just how risky it is for the general public for police officers to be hired on the basis of their ethnic or religious identity and not on the basis of merit alone.
Spencer hopes Noor will be brought to justice. I'm Chad Groening.
A university in Wisconsin wants to hire a so-called social justice reporter for the school newspaper.
The reporter will be reporting on diversity, inclusion, and social justice issues for the Racket, the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse's school newspaper. Jelaine Appling is president of the Wisconsin Family Council.
I think there's way better ways to spend the hard-earned money of Wisconsin's families and others who contribute to the monies that go to the UW system.
Editors vow to publish a plethora of diverse opinions, but Appling thinks most stories will lean unmistakably left.
Well, what we know is that diversity, inclusion, and social justice are buzzwords, not for conservatives, but for liberals. And what it means is they're going to promote homosexuality and transgenderism and any other kind of, I would call it, the sexual anarchy approach to life that they have on campuses.
The successful job candidate will earn $24 a week, plus an additional $12 per article, according to Campus Reform. I'm Bob Kellogg.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
My name's Rodney. I've known about Teen Challenge a long time, but I wasted 5 more years drinking before I admitted that I needed this program. But here, I'm sober, and I learned it's never too late to turn things around.
If you know an adult or teenager who's struggling with a chemical addiction, Teen Challenge can help. Call us today at 417-581-2181 or reach us online at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Tonight, the Russian foreign minister calling the arrest of Maria Butina unacceptable.
Nice.
She's the 29-year-old Russian gun rights activist accused of being a Kremlin agent. In a phone call with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Sergei Lavrov complaining about the actions of U.S. law enforcement, saying the charges against Butina are fabricated. But U.S. prosecutors accuse her of going to extreme measures to infiltrate the American political system, even offering sex in exchange for a position in one special interest organization. Butina, according to sources, getting her direction from one of Vladimir Putin's allies, Alexander Torshin, the two seen here at the National Prayer Breakfast. Prosecutors believe she was trying to advance the interests of the Russia Federation, even getting close enough to then-candidate Donald Trump to ask this question.
Do you want to continue the politics of sanctions?
I believe I would get along very nicely with Putin.
Butina, through an attorney, denies the charges against her, calling the allegations overblown. And tonight, ABC News learning she may have also had the financial support of a Russian billionaire. A source familiar with testimony Butina provided to a Senate Intelligence Committee last spring telling ABC News she identified Konstantin Nikolaev as a source of financial support, and that alleged support from the billionaire with investments in U.S. energy and tech companies, part of a network of wealthy Russian oligarchs that led federal prosecutors to believe she was an extreme flight risk, leading to her arrest.
Wow. So, first of all, I found this this bit on abcnewsgo.com, and I mean, it's such a complete news package. I was just surprised, and so I have to give them credit where credit is due. What a well done piece. All the information you need in like a minute and 45 seconds. I was so grateful to find it because I've seen a couple stories about this woman. And at first I thought it was fake news. And then I started to see, more links appear, and there were different credible news organizations that I could go to. And I thought, okay, this is real. This woman is real. She really did offer, these types of activities in exchange. No one seems to be able to corroborate that anyone actually took her up on that. But wow. So welcome back to the program. Stacey Washington, at Stacey on the Right on Twitter and Instagram. You can find the streams on YouTube, Periscope, and Facebook. Thanks for being with us today. And I'm sorry, I've been talking about today. Yeah, today's Friday. Did you see how I just almost thought today was Thursday? I know it's Friday. It's Friday. So a U.S. senator is actually pushing the Treasury Department to investigate the relationships between these companies and major weapons and ammunition manufacturers in Russia. And I just find the whole thing kind of fascinating. And I think one of the things that is happening with this woman, he's calling for the investigation of companies' relationships with Russian arms manufacturers, and you've got it's all working together. It's all just crazy pants. And so one of the things that going into a Friday, going into the weekend, you're not going to be thinking about Russia over the weekend, but there are parts of our government that are doing a great job at trying to figure out exactly what's happened. And I'm not completely mistrustful of our government, but I'm also not just sitting back and thinking, oh, everything's going fantastically. There's an element to some of the leadership at some of the agencies that is really bent on seeing President Trump removed from office and subverting the will of the people. And then there's a bunch of career service people who they work in a much more silent fashion. They're not going to be on television. They're not going to be, on CNN or anything like that. And those people are really working towards justice. So whatever direction that leads them in. And they're the ones that I'm hoping we're going to see just the fruit of their work, the fruit of their labor coming to fruition. And I sincerely hope that that's what's going to happen. So I don't know if you guys heard this other news. We have a ton of news. One of the biggest pieces for today is our continuation of a discussion about the jobs report, fewer jobs created in the month of July than in the month of June, but still fantastic news. We've got 155,965,000 people employed in June, which is the 11th record setter under President Trump. Following last month's strong employment report, numbers released on Friday were even better in some respects. The Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics says a record 155,965 people were employed in July. And this is a record, an 11th record breaker since President Trump took office 19 months ago. So first of all, we just sit back for a second and go, 19 months. It's been a whirlwind ride. We haven't loved all of it, but I'm not tired of winning yet when it comes to the economy and what President Trump has been able to do. The quote from President Trump in his campaign rally last night, he said, "Our economy is soaring, our jobs are booming, factories are pouring back into our country. They're coming in from all over the world. We are defending our workers." And that's good stuff, really good stuff. The unemployment rate edged down to 3.9%. And I think when we drill down, the numbers are good in other places as well. Like, for instance, polling shows that Donald Trump is enjoying well over 20% approval rating within the black community. Rasmussen report says 29% of blacks are happy with President Trump. 29%. Now, for any other group, well, besides Hispanics, you'd say, oh, that's not good. We're talking about a group that has traditionally given less than 10% approval on anything to Republicans. So now Donald Trump's not your traditional Republican, but he's definitely exactly what we're looking for right now when it comes to someone who's a business person who understands the economy and what they're going to do. And so I just, can we just give a little bit of credit where it's due? Well, we give the criticism where it's due, right? I've criticized the president on areas where I've not been happy. I've been very stark in my assessment of some of the moral stuff, but here we are with this approval rating with the black community. That's people who've gotten jobs. That's people who've gotten raises and bonuses. That's people who are happy with their tax reform. This is a group of people who are a little more difficult to please in some aspects, but I don't know about you, but I've bumped into, I remember one conversation in particular where I realized while I was out shopping that the front left tire on my minivan, I'd driven over a nail or a screw or something, and I could actually hear it. I got out of the car, I went into a store, came back out, and I noticed that the tire looked like it was low. I walked up to it and got down next to it to screw the little cap on, and it was literally hissing. So I drove home and stopped at the gas station near where we were living at the time. And the guy who owns the station, it's really more like a body shop where he basically was going to plug my tire for me. And so he puts the car up, and one of his employees is plugging the tire, and he starts talking to me about politics. And at the time, so this is a few years ago, and I hadn't done as much media locally here in St. Louis, so I'm pretty sure he didn't know I was politically minded or a commentator or anything like that. So we start chatting, and he says that, he's concerned about, this is obviously during the Obama administration, he's concerned about the Republicans taking over. If the Republicans win the White House after Obama, what will they do with the economy? And they tend to side with big banks, et cetera, et cetera. And I started talking about the lower taxes and less regulations, and the possibility of us having that meant that, even if you don't like the affinity of Republicans siding with big businesses, tax reform helps everyone. Lower taxes helps everyone, and how that could be something that could be really good. And then he talked about the financial meltdown and how no one was held accountable. And I talked about how that's not a Republican thing. That's a government thing where we have government officials who oversee the activities of certain people in the private sector, and people aren't prosecuted for things. Just like this was before Hillary Clinton had gotten completely away with the email scandal, obviously. But I named off a few instances where we're talking about a nation where people who are in government are not held accountable. And he looked at me and he said, "You're right about that." I said, "Yeah, I'm just telling you because you are a business owner, and if you did something like that here at your business, you'd have ramifications, but these people don't." And as we were talking, and he's a black guy, he owns this body shop, it's very successful, and he's obviously doing pretty well. He's got employees, and I'm just there to get my tire plugged. And we ended up talking for about 15 minutes. The guy came in, he was like, "Your tire's ready," and we talked for about 5 minutes past the time that the guy had plugged the tire. And so as I was getting up to leave, he said to me, I don't know you. I don't think I've ever seen you before. I was like, "Well, we live in this neighborhood." He said, okay. He said, "Well, I live in the neighborhood too." I was like, "Well, awesome." And he said, "I've never talked to a Republican who just talked about the issues." And he said, "You didn't seem like you were really trying to convince me." And I was like, "Well, I wish you would be a Republican too. But the fact is, I just was talking about what I know, and you were talking about what you know, and I respect your position." And he was like, "I respect yours too, and I think you've informed me on a couple things." And I don't believe that interaction with that man was so crazily unique that you can't have that same conversation with any two people. The fact that he and I were both black doesn't preclude that same kind of conversation from happening among other people. And I'm saying that even in this heightened negativity that we're all kind of marinating in, even in the kind of language that we see coming out of people on the left and, some of the far right folks too. We're not completely without fault over on the right-hand side of the political spectrum. People are going to be people on no matter what their politics. But I truly believe that we still have an opportunity to communicate with each other. In the end, we're still going to church together. We're still going to the same grocery stores. Our kids are still going to the same schools. Yes, a huge portion of our populace is infected with Trump derangement syndrome. But there are still multiple tens of millions of people who are not. People who honestly, whether they like the president or not, they're willing to experience the benefits of his policies that work. They're willing to give that stuff a try. I mean, look at the tax reform package. The Democrats tried like the dickens to stop it, but they couldn't. And now that it's in place, we don't have anybody protesting about that. We do not have Americans en masse protesting the tax reform package. Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters' statements about the tax reform package and how it's a scam are not representative of the majority of the Democrats in their party. Not the activists, not the people you see on television, not the people you see organizing these stinky tent cities and stuff like that. I'm talking about just regular everyday Democrats who they probably think their taxes are too high. I can't tell you how many times a person who is openly a Democrat has told me they don't like their tax rate. They're willing to pay it because they think the money goes to the needy. But if they could find another way to take care of that problem, they would want their taxes to be lower. That is, I mean, you'd have to be a fool if someone would say you can keep more of your money and you say, no, I want the government to have it. Only a fool talks like that. I have met a couple people like that, but they're not the norm. So we do still have room for communication and conversation on what's going on in this country. And I think that may be the part that motivates the Democrats to the dangerous rhetoric that we see. And when I say the Democrats in that context, I'm talking about the activists in the party, the ones who are thought leaders and try to shape the conversation. As long as we're all spitting in each other's faces and yelling about Russia, we can't talk about all of the common ground that we have on so many issues. I think one of the issues that we have a ton of common ground on is immigration as well, besides the economy. The reason I say that is because poll after poll after poll, it has been consistent, even in the era that we currently live in, where almost every media apparatus advocates for an open border or some form of lawlessness as it pertains to immigration. Polls show a steady 67 to 74% of Americans want to see controlled immigration, and they don't want to see illegal immigration increased. Even with every media outlet except Fox advocating for it. That means on the ground, common sense reigns supreme for people who are working and putting their pants on one leg at a time, paying taxes, working to feed their families. That's why they don't want us talking to each other. That's why they want us yelling and screaming. All right, when we get back, we're going to have Drew Johnson, Senior Fellow at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. He's going to be with us talking about energy industry. So stay right there.
When our health insurance renewal notice arrived last fall, my wife and I made the decision to drop our plan. With the monthly premiums and deductible, we'd have to pay $30,000 just to use it. So we did our homework and switched to MediShare. The cost savings are incredible, over $500 a month, and we don't have to pay for services we don't need or don't agree with. Then, out of the blue, she had to have emergency surgery. Scary stuff. $150,000 in hospital bills, and MediShare members took care of everything. All we paid was our small portion. I'm a doctor who's been in healthcare for 20 years, and this is one of the most impressive programs I've ever seen. Thank God she's fully recovered, and now we're telling everyone about MediShare.
Call 855-PSALM-23 to find out how much you can save on your healthcare. MediShare. Call 855-PSALM-23. That's 855-PSALM-23.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Perhaps you've heard of the latest environmental movement to ban plastic straws. Even though they're small, they are large in number. The activists claim that there are millions of straws used every day. That number seems high, at least to me, since I avoid using plastic straws. I figure I don't need a straw when I drink water or a beverage at home. Why do I need one in a restaurant? And if I go to a Starbucks, I have a personal cup with a straw that I rinse out when I'm done. As Christians, we should practice sound stewardship of the environment, but I also think we need to think carefully about the impact of a plastic straw ban. On the one hand, all these straws end up as litter in landfills and in the ocean. On the other hand, there are some people, those with disabilities and small children, for example, that actually need a straw to drink. At the moment, the biggest plastic pollution challenge is in our oceans, and plastic straws aren't the problem. Large plastic floating islands in the ocean are a major environmental issue. Perhaps the best known is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that floats between California and Japan. The nonprofit Ocean Cleanup has discovered that the Pacific Patch is much larger than originally estimated. But plastic straws and plastic bags aren't the reason. Nearly half of it was fishing nets. When combined with ropes and line, it accounted for a majority of the trash. The rest included hard plastics like crates and bottle caps, and when Ocean Cleanup looked at food packaging, they found that nearly a third was written in Japanese and nearly a third was written in Chinese. None of this is to argue against the reducing of our use of plastic straws, but it does remind us that if we want to address the problem of plastic pollution, we should focus more attention on things other than plastic straws. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right. I'm also the co-chair of National Center's Advisory Council, Project 21. You can find out more at nationalcenter.org. I am so happy to welcome our next guest to the program. He is someone that I greatly respect because one of my favorite groups is the Taxpayer Protection Alliance, because they work on behalf of, you guessed it, taxpayers. And if it's anything I want to pay less of, it's taxes. We have kids. We have a dog who needs to be groomed on a regular basis, and I have a boot thing that I'm trying to work through. So I need more of my money in my pocket, which is fantastic to have an opportunity to talk about what's going on with the energy industry. Drew, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stacey.
So let's talk about this. We've got the energy industry paying it forward in Missouri. What's going on?
Yeah, this is a really interesting sort of offshoot of a bunch of good news, really, with the energy industry, which is, things are getting better. The air is getting cleaner. The water is getting cleaner. Energy is getting cheaper for Americans. And this is sort of an extension of that, where some of the federal leasing that's going on, both in federal lands and offshore, and this is offshore in particular, the money that the energy companies are paying for the leases are going back to the states, and the states are getting to decide what to do with that money. So in Missouri, for example, you guys have the opportunity to put that towards parks and greenways or state parks, and a lot of it's a matching grant program, and some of it just comes to states to spend how they want.
Okay, so we happen to be big Missouri Parks people in my family. We like to take our bikes and ride the bikes. We like to take the kids with their rollerblades and do it. Now that they're teenagers, we just go, and sometimes we just run around the park or walk around the parks. And a ton of our parks here in Missouri, you drive an hour out or 2 hours out, and it's just like basically someplace that you walk, but you have these amazing vistas of hills and valleys and all of that, because Missouri is very green and very forested. And all of these parks have some kind of little historical monuments that you can learn something, and a little building that's open for part of the day that you can go into as well. And so when you say we can redirect that money to that, is that something that they've said they're going to do, or is it just an option that we could utilize?
It's actually something that's been going on for a few years now, and the states do have a lot of leeway in as far as how they can use that money. But for most states, and for Missouri, I believe it's a couple $1 million that the basically different agencies within the state can decide how it's used. And from my understanding, for most states, it ends up either in state parks or with wildlife programs and things like that. So, yeah, a lot of the trails you're talking about, a lot of the state parks and the greenways and things like that, it's actually the evil energy companies that the left loves to beat up on is subsidizing a lot of that. So Missouri taxpayers don't have to pay full freight for those.
Oh, my. Another instance of people that or industries that are supposed to be the devil doing something nice for us. How will we cope with this news? We might need a few days to just lay on our fainting couches and consider the totality of what you've just shared.
One of the funny things about doing some of the research I've done in the last few weeks about environmental hysteria, for lack of better terms, and I found Al Gore uses 20 times more electricity at his house than the average person, and that's sort of how I got into this sort of research. And I realized very quickly that this industry that's so demonized is actually the real reason why the air is so much cleaner than it was, in the 70s and 80s when we were kids. Mm-hmm. The air is actually something like 70% cleaner than it was 40 years ago. And that's basically because of all the natural gas that's being used instead of coal and the developments that energy companies have put into making things cleaner and greener, because they know, first of all, they don't want to be the people responsible for all this pollution, but they also know that we as Americans are concerned about the environment. We want our kids to grow up in a clean world and breathe clean air and drink clean water. And so they've really put in billions of dollars every year to try to make their products cleaner. And so that's another thing that's always, as a taxpayer watchdog and advocate, when I see all this money that's going to renewables that never really turns out, it never really amounts to anything. And then these energy companies, these natural gas and oil companies, spend all these billions of dollars out of their own pocket to make things cleaner. It shows you how the market works.
Mm. It does. And so let's talk about that a little bit, Drew, because you just highlighted something that I wish they would talk about on CBS or whenever they bring up something having to do with the energy industry. I wish they would kind of just nutshell what you've just shared to kind of give Americans an idea of, first of all, these aren't big, huge companies run by cyborgs or robots. Americans work for the energy companies that are in our country. So Americans are helping to make these decisions to clean up different processes or to change the way things are done so that they're cleaner, and that over time we've seen these huge improvements, which are largely unreported. When you talk about this, it's like this, to me, it sounds like it's like an engine that keeps getting stronger and going faster every decade, which is the push for our energy companies to be cleaner, more efficient, but still deliver the same level of service. We all have air conditioning, we all have central heating, we all use all of these things without a second thought. Is it something that it just goes on behind the scenes and most Americans are never going to be aware of it? Or do you see them doing maybe a public information campaign to kind of inform us of how our energy companies are the drivers behind this?
I think it boils down to one simple thing, and that's that, and this being a radio host, and I know this being a columnist, what America loves to hear are the scary stories and the bad stories. And there's, especially with the sort of green alarmism that I see with, the Al Gores and the Leonardo DiCaprios and all these sort of people. They want to create this almost it's like a Marvel comic of us versus the world, and we're killing the earth and we've got to save the earth. When in reality, all these good news stories just don't get reported the way they should. And I think that really a lot of the environmental groups need to gin up kind of scare tactics to keep the money flowing and to tell their story. But really a lot of the environmental problems that we had, a generation or two ago have been alleviated. And, government is a small part of that, sure, but the bigger part is just a corporate social responsibility and these companies taking it on themselves to improve their products and make things cleaner, to make them more appealing to people, to consumers, to people like you and I who buy these things. But the other thing is that they've actually figured out ways to capture some of, like methane, for example. When natural gas is being produced, methane is released into the air, and that was a big cause years back for a lot of pollution, a lot of emissions, and they realized that they could capture that methane, reuse it, so it actually, benefits their bottom line while being good for the environment. So it's one of those things where, doing the right thing also helps them out financially, and it's just, like I said earlier, the market at work.
It is, and I've learned a lot. Like when you go on vacation, Drew, you get the opportunity to take a tour of something, and then you go inside. This is what happened to us. We went to Galveston, Texas, which is not exactly known for its beaches, but the primary attraction, in my opinion, is that they have the Oceana, which is it was formerly an oil rig, an operational oil rig that they have moored into their bay there, and it's a museum, and you can learn all about the energy industry in there, specifically oil. And so we went into it thinking, this should be a good way to kill a few minutes. We were in there for over an hour, and I learned so much about how, well, first of all, that so much of what we touch and use every day is made of oil. And second of all, how instrumental the oil industry has been in cleaning up and taking care of our environment. Anywhere where they drill, they try to leave things better than they found it, whether it's on the sea floor or whether it's wherever they put down any of their equipment. Their end game is to extract the energy and then leave it better than they found it. And they utilize every bit of whatever they pull out for some purpose, and that they use technology in amazingly innovative ways, that things that you would never even consider that go into producing oil, to refining it, to bringing it to shore. All of these things are highly technological and very advanced, and really could only happen here, first. It's our own creative energies at work. And so we left there, and I thought to myself, I really consider myself to be pretty well informed, but look what I've learned. And it sounds similar to what you're explaining about how our energy companies are really taking the lead. They haven't just tried to take it. They're in the lead on cleaning our environment and keeping it really just as wholesome as possible for us to continue to extract energy and live the way that we do.
Absolutely. One of the interesting sort of factoids I found was that energy generation today actually produces less CO2 emissions and less. The EPA basically has 6 emissions that they're really concerned about. All those are down less than they were 30 years ago. So even though they're producing so much more energy, because obviously the population is up probably 80 million people in the states since 30 years ago, but the actual emissions and the pollution are down, and that's all because of basically these investments that they've made into natural gas, which obviously is a lot cleaner than coal, and taking advantage of some of the technological improvements like you were just talking about. And one of the things that really it frustrates me when I look at the rest of the world and the sort of environmental activist response to things, that the only reason that we're able to, in America, get to a position where we can, reduce emissions, and we're leading the world as far as emissions reductions. And the reason we're able to do that is because we were able to develop as a nation. We're able to basically get rich enough to where we know that our kids are going to be fed. We know that our kids are going to be educated. We know that we're going to have clean water. And we see these other countries that aren't as fortunate. And rather than allowing them to develop so they can get to the point where they have the leisure to worry about how they produce their energy and reducing emissions and things like that, we want to say, no, don't develop. Keep, making coal out of the trees that you cut down and burn oil for heat and things like that. The environmentalists just need to understand that the way to make the world cleaner is to be more like America and be in a position to have the leisure, to have the luxury to worry about that.
It's such a great illustration that you just shared there. I mean, I hope that, it's because it's kind of like Good News Friday. We're covering a lot of news products or a lot of news items, but we have 2 great interviews today. You are kind of rounding out the show today with what I consider to be excellent news. And I think it's important for us. I understand the whole environmentalist thing it comes from a place of people wanting to save the environment. And so at the very impetus of it comes from a place of people wanting to be good. But it has turned into a hysteria that's actually detrimental to what they claim they want to see happen. It's more technology, not less, more creativity and more expertise in these arenas that brings us to a place where the kind of news that you're reporting and writing about can actually occur. And so I've got this, the link, I'll put it in the live stream. Secretary Zinke announces over $61 million for states to support parks and outdoor recreation. This is across the country. It's great news, and it's just more of the work that you're doing at the Taxpayer Protection Alliance. Can you give us the website where we can find out more?
Absolutely. It's protectingtaxpayers.org, and we basically spend our time, like you were saying in the lead-in, making sure you pay less money in taxes, and the tax money that you do pay is spent more effectively, more efficiently.
I love it. It's one of my favorite organizations. I know I can't share all the organizations that are my favorite, but it's especially awesome when I get the email. I'm like, I know Drew. I'm happy to have him on the show to talk about what they're doing. So thank you for joining us on a Friday. I hope you're going to have a fantastic weekend, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about the excellent things you guys are doing and reporting on.
Thanks so much, Stacey. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Drew. Thanks for joining the show. Drew Johnson, Senior Fellow at the Taxpayer Protection Alliance. I love it. I posted a link to the announcement. It's on Facebook now, so you can get that and click the link when you feel like it. You know, don't feel pressured, but it's there for you on the Stacey on the Right Show Facebook page. And you can see the announcement from the Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, who has been so phenomenal. I really feel like he's doing a fantastic job since he's taken over that position under the Trump administration. And I'm excited to see him do more, excited to see Drew do more over at TPA. And I'm excited to have more here on this program. So last segment of the show, we'll come in with some audio from a Democrat saying that it's clear Russia was after both parties, which is quite an announcement for him to make. And then we'll take your calls. If you'd like to round out the week with calls from the listeners, I certainly would. I'd love to hear from you. 866-963-2037. That's 866-963-2037. You can join the program if you call that number. We'd love to talk to you. And I also want to highlight a little bit, just a smidge. So if you head over to StaceyOnTheRight.com and hit the subscribe button, you don't miss anything over there. You'll get all of the information that we share and push out. It's for the newsletter, which comes once a week, unless I'm on vacation or something like that. And then you can also find out more at Stacey on the Right on Twitter and Instagram. Those accounts are also kind of totally different. Twitter, more news and information. Instagram, obviously it's just pictures, so it's kind of a cross-section of our entire lives, which is super fun. I'm looking forward to our wonderful guests that we're going to be adding to the program. We already have, in my opinion, the best guests, but we'll be adding even more fantastic guests starting next week. We'll be starting off the week with Janine Pirro of Fox News on Monday's program, and we'll just be progressing through. We're going to speak to Walker Wildman on the program. We're going to have some more guests over from American Family Radio and other things. So great plans in the work for you. So excited about it. Go to afr.net to learn more. You can go to urbanfamilytalk.com to learn more. And we will see you right after these important messages for more Stacey on the Right. This is Just a Minute with Stacey Washington. Have you noticed how obsessed leftists are with painting anyone who disagrees with them as wanting people to die? This is interesting because Democrats support Planned Parenthood, which is responsible for the deaths of over 317,000 unborn American babies in the year 2017. That's more than the population of the city of St. Louis. It's true that the mothers carrying those babies requested those deaths. It's true that abortion is legal in this country, but it doesn't make it right or moral. No matter what political party we claim, it is our responsibility as Christians to obey God's word, no matter what the law may allow. It's instructive to remember that at one point in this country, the Supreme Court of the United States deemed certain members of our society as property. Our nation's highest court has since come to the moral and correct conclusion about the humanity of all persons, except those yet to be born. I'm Stacey Washington. Find out more at StaceyOnTheRight.com.
Hi, I'm Will Addison.
And I'm Miki.
From Airing the Addisons on Urban Family Talk.
We'd like to invite you to the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference coming up August 17th and 18th.
The list of speakers is amazing. We have Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation, Dr. Clarence Schuler of Building Lasting Relationships, Abraham Hamilton III, Pastor Bert Harper and his wife Jan, Stacy Washington, Lonnie Poindexter, Pastor Dexter Sanders, and we'll be there too.
There's a direct attack by the enemy on marriage and family, and babies in the womb are treated like political footballs instead of life. We want to encourage and equip the body of Christ to fight for the restoration of the family. If we can get our families on track, a lot of society's problems could be solved. The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference is from Urban Family Communications, a division of the American Family Association. You can learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Donald Trump's America.
President Trump tweeting his thanks to Kim Jong-un after the North Korean leader sent him a letter to follow up on their June summit. The president also saying he looks forward to seeing Kim soon. In that same message, the president expressed gratitude for Kim, keeping his promise on returning the remains of American service members killed during the Korean War. Vice President Pence in Hawaii to receive the suspected remains Wednesday.
To see those 55 flag drape cases be carried so solemnly in, and not just as a vice president, but as the son of a combat veteran from the Korean War, it was deeply moving for me.
Kim's letter arriving the same day as the repatriation and renewed questions over the North's willingness to denuclearize. A report on Monday indicating Pyongyang is building missiles in the same facility where the country built ballistic missiles that could hit the U.S. At the White House, Doug McKelway, Fox News.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
This is one where there is no Democratic or Republican answer, since clearly the goal of our adversaries was not to favor one party over the other. It was to wreak havoc and split divisions. And I think this committee under your leadership is trying to take this issue on in the appropriate way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like, that's almost that's anticlimactic, isn't it? That he has admitted something that we all kind of know to be true. It's just weird to hear him say it. I think, yeah, it's just weird to hear him say it. Welcome back to the program. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Great to be with you. And what we're now looking at with the last segment of the show, if you'd love to call in, the number is 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. And we are going to be taking, in the last segment of the first hour of the show, we'll be taking calls on a regular basis. So we're hoping that we'll get a chance to chat with you, and it'll be exciting to be able to do that. Starting on Monday, we'll just be revamping things a little bit. Not much will change. It's going to be still the same show, same bat channel. It's going to be fantastic. So yeah, over on the New York Times, you may have heard a little bit about this story. I'm kind of flabbergasted by it, because it seems like in the Me Too era and the era of people not being allowed to say anything that might be even slightly incendiary, that this wouldn't stand, but yet here it is. The editorial board over at the New York Times has added an editorial writer to their staff who has a history of racially charged tweets. And this is after they gave basically the sack to a writer over her insensitive social media comments. So the writer's name is Sarah Zhang. She's a newly hired lead technology writer on the editorial side. And once it was announced, people kind of took a look at her Twitter and realized that she's been really anti-white, very, very kind of racially insensitive postings on her Twitter. I can't read them here, but she has just a bunch of stuff online that would not be allowed from anyone else. And we've seen something like this with Joy-Ann Reid, who had those posts, which honestly, I wasn't kidding when I said she should have just said, that's what I believed back then, and now I don't believe that. Not because it would have made the social justice warriors and babies feel any better, but because that's the truth. She used to be more conservative, or should I say moderate. She used to actually have much more moderate beliefs. Now she does not. She's a hardcore leftist, and her job kind of requires her to be that. What I don't understand is why she couldn't just say that's what I believed at the time instead of making up all these stories about being hacked. So they issued a statement about some of the things that she said, and part of the statement from them is she sees now that this approach only served to feed the vitriol, which we too often see on social media. She regrets it, and the Times does not condone it. So here's your master class in what to do if someone that's working on something is a conservative and people don't like something on their page. I mean, I'm just going by what this is what flies for Democrats, so clearly it should be able to fly for conservatives as well. They also posted a statement from Ms. Zhang, who said, and basically she used to write, she was a senior writer at The Verge. She said the things that she sent out were counter-trolling. As a woman of color on the internet, what? I'm sorry. Woman of color? So this is my problem with all of this. The unique history of blacks in America, the slavery aspect, is the reason why there's legislation surrounding trying to ameliorate those impacts. This woman has not experienced any slavery. She's not from a disadvantaged group. She's here in America and fantastic. She is not a white person, so I can give her that, but she's not a woman of color. Woman of color is a term that's reserved for us black folks. This is kind of ridiculous, but it's also just par for the course for people taking what is, this is the legacy of slavery and the things that have been done to try to fix that, which I don't agree with all of them. Some of them had their place and now they should be eliminated, like the affirmative action. I'm not down with that. But there's a history that's connected to it. And when other groups that have never been disadvantaged and have recently arrived in this country, basically arrived just in time to receive all of the benefits and wonder that is America, try to claim a part of the history of the civil rights movement and the legacy of slavery in America, which is a relationship between people who used to own slaves, the U.S. government, and black people, we should see that as being disingenuous. We should see that Americans, including black Americans, we have worked hard to create what is now America. And blacks, back when black people didn't have the freedom or the complete ownership in America that we have today, when we weren't free or we were living under segregation, we still participated in the armed forces. We still helped to build a lot of the historic buildings that are now monuments in this country. We helped to build all of the buildings in the South, the ones that are still existing to this day, the plantation houses, all of that. We, black Americans, helped to build that during slavery and after. So the legacy that we have is one that is uniquely tied to the Anglo-Saxon heritage of America. That is not something you can say if you are a Chinese American who immigrated here and you were never a slave. No disadvantage to you, no shade. You're not a bad person, or, this isn't about making you feel bad about not having been descended from slaves, but your legacy is not the same as that of blacks who are descended from slaves and who have been here since slave ships brought their ancestors over here. Sorry, that's just not you. We need to stop allowing these people to assume that mantle because it's not one that belongs to them. The history is unique for black Americans. It's tied to white Americans, and it's tied to this country. It's not derogatory towards others. It just doesn't include them. And when they take it on, they use it to try to excuse bad behavior like she's doing, and we shouldn't allow that. It shouldn't really, being a person of color shouldn't be your excuse for doing anything wrong. I mean, what does that have to do with anything? So she says, as a woman of color on the internet, I face torrents of online hate, often along this vein. And then she gives examples of opportunities that people took to use a racial slur against her. People saying they do violence to her because apparently she's a lesbian. And she says, as a result, I engaged in what I thought at the time as counter-trolling, While it was intended as satire, I deeply regret that I mimicked the language of my harassers. After candid conversations, the Times said Ms. Zhang understands that this type of rhetoric is not acceptable at the Times, and we're confident that she will be an important voice for the editorial board moving forward. So my issue with this is not that I feel like she should be fired. If they sat down with her and had a discussion and they're fine with it, why is it not okay? Because she said things much worse than what Roseanne Barr said. Why is it not okay for Hollywood producers to sit down and have a chat with Roseanne Barr? She deletes her tweets and moves on about her business. Why is it that Roseanne Barr has to be completely blacklisted from Hollywood and eliminated while this woman is going to get to keep her editorial position? It's the double standard that stinks. Whatever decision they're making about her, it's not okay for them to do the same thing, to do something worse to someone else who obviously now regrets what she said. She says she regrets what she said. Roseanne Barr regrets what she tweeted. Now, Prager University has suggested that Ms. Zhang was able to keep her job because her comments were directed against white men. These days, you can get into a lot of trouble for saying dumb, ugly, or offensive things on Twitter, says Prager, unless they're against white men, of course. Then you get a gig at the New York Times. The newspaper faced a similar situation back in February after announcing the hiring of Wired's Quinn Norton as their lead opinion writer on technology, which prompted a social media backlash over her description of white nationalist internet troll Andrew Arnheimer as a terrible person and an old friend. Ms. Norton had also used slurs against gay people, retweeted a racial slur. Hours later, she announced that she would no longer join the paper, and an editorial page editor, James Bennett, said they decided to go their separate ways. So I guess the response to me would be, oh, well, each situation is different and each situation has to be taken on its own in its own context. Okay. But there's still a standard that's obviously, there's two. One for people who are on the right and another one for people who are on the left. And that's not cool. Not in a country where we consider people to be equal under the law, justice to be blind. But I guess these new rules really don't encompass everybody. They just encompass the people on the left. So you can call in if you'd like. We have the call lines open, 866-963-2037. 866-963-2037. So we had just a ton of other kind of news going on. And one of the things that happened yesterday that we didn't really get a chance to discuss on the show was that the president had this huge meeting with leaders from the Christian community who happened to be black pastors. No networks covered the event. But President Trump hosted urban pastors at the White House for a roundtable about religion. Now, the White House has posted some footage of the remarks on YouTube, and Alveda King was one of the participants. And Trump actually said, quote, "Throughout our history, America's churches and religious leaders have called for change and inspired us to care for and bring hope back to those in need." And then he opened the floor to the mostly black and there were a couple of Hispanic pastors there. And those pastors praised President Trump as a friend who has empowered Christians in the White House, including Dr. Darrell Scott. He's a longtime member of the National Diversity Coalition for Trump, and he called President Trump the most pro-black president that we've had in our lifetime, saying the president actually wants to prove something to our community, our faith-based community, and our ethnic community, which the last president didn't feel like he had to. Dr. Alveda King, who's the niece of Martin Luther King, said she was honored to pray right here in the White House and said great things are on the horizon, I promise. And I have to say, he doesn't have to meet with black pastors. He doesn't have to have a roundtable on, religion in America with black pastors. Everyone that is a detractor of the president who calls him a racist, they completely ignore this. You know why this wasn't on CNN? Because they have to have guests on who will say the president is a racist. And it's one of the prerequisites for people who are on the right. If you want to go on CNN and do some commentary, they have to be pretty reliably sure that while you're giving your conservative commentary, you're going to at least agree with them that Donald Trump is a racist. If you're not going to, they're going to make sure that you're savaged by the other guests because they've got to make sure you know, you're not towing the line. You're not saying the things that you need to say. So I think to see Hispanic and Black faith leaders thanking Trump one by one for empowering them, for them to be able to go straight to the president and give updates about what's going on in their communities, what his policies are doing or are not doing, it's wonderful. And we should be getting some news about that from all of the media outlets. But this kind of imbalance that we're seeing is the reason why Sarah Huckabee Sanders is not going to defend the media. This and so many other things. It's not cool that they won't give him any opportunity to have any positive news, especially on the network, on CNN. I talk about them specifically because that's where Jim Acosta is from. And they play 24 hours of nothing but, I hate Trump. It's like the background track to their lives. So we talked about the ridiculousness of the Medicare for All proposal, but I want to give you guys some specifics. And Brian Jundeff, who's a physician over at the Daily Caller, he writes for the Daily Caller, calls Medicare for All like a cold sore. It appears randomly, lasts for a week or so, then disappears until next time. This week it's back and it's on Bernie Sanders' lip. The plan is not new. John Conyers presented Medicare for All way back in 2003. He called it the United National Healthcare Act, or H.R. 676. And he had 25 co-sponsors for that piece of garbage. It went nowhere, but sat around dormant like a cold sore, and it keeps reappearing. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders is now holding the 15-year-old bill and running it through, trying to get it to be like, basically, this is the next step to Obamacare, because Obamacare has failed and just being dismantled bit by bit. We're talking about something that he's proposing that dwarfs the entire budget of the United States, $32 trillion during their first 10 years of full implementation. Our current federal budget is $4.1 trillion. So $3.3 trillion a year, which is almost all of our $4.1 trillion budget. This is what's going on. I can't imagine this winning in November. I mean, anything's possible, but I can't imagine it. Happy Friday. God bless. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back with you on Monday.